The first thing they told us was that the grid never lied. Instructor Vel Orvac said it the way you say something that isn't really a warning, the way you say the floor is level or the air is breathable. A statement of conditions. The Keth-Solvren Sorting Grid had been running intake classifications at Vethran Outpost Academy for 31 years, and in 31 years, it had filed a result for every cadet that came through the annex. Tier 1 through Tier 4, 612 cadets. Not one blank. I was Cadet 613. The annex smelled like wet stone and something else. Something alive and chemical, the way a room smells when the things in it are afraid of each other and working to hide it. The walls curved, pale gray paneling shot through with the faint blue lines of the grid's sensor arrays, and the floor at the center was bare and scuffed from 14 years of paws and claws and whatever a Veldrani uses for feet. The observation rail ran the upper arc, and the rest of my intake cohort was up there already, watching. Osvarath was up there too. He'd made a point of talking to me on the way in. Not talking, announcing. He stood at the rail with his throat sacs lit amber, which I'd learned in the first week meant something like contempt filtered through amusement, and he told me that Tier 4 required 22% of cadets to be sedated and removed. He said it conversationally, like he was describing the lunch schedule. Then he told me that nobody from a mid-weight colony station had ever cleared Tier 3. I nodded and went down to the floor. The Veldrani are chemical communicators. Everything they say, under the words, is pheromone. Fear reads to them the way a raised voice reads to us, involuntary, directional, impossible to fake. Osvarath had been using that on the intake cohort since day one, a faint pressure in the air around him, barely perceptible, and the younger cadets shifted without knowing why. The older ones gripped things. On me it landed like nothing at all. I grew up on Kepler 7D, tidally locked, 22-hour days on the Lightside Ridge, where my father ran an extraction operation, and the emergency siren went off often enough that I stopped flinching at it by age 9. Whatever my body does with fear, it doesn't do it where the air can read it. I didn't know that was unusual. I thought that was just what people were. The grid's first specimen was a Vel Harrow crawler. 12 legs, bioluminescent sensory bristles, a scent gland array that could produce a fear chemical spike strong enough to register on the annex's ambient sensors from 2 meters away. They use them in Tier 1 because the chemical output is measurable and clean. The grid watches the cadet's pheromone response, maps the stress threshold, files the number. The crawler came out of the intake gate and crossed the floor toward me. I watched it. It watched me back. All 6 of its front-facing sensor clusters rotating slightly, adjusting. It stopped about a meter away, and did the thing they do when they're working out what they're looking at, which is a very fast oscillation of the front bristles, that's either a question or a greeting, and probably both. I held still. The grid registered my pheromone output at baseline. It ran the sequence for 40 seconds. Then it filed a note, I learned this later, that said stress response, not detected. Escalating to Tier 2. The crawler wandered back to its gate. I stood there. Up on the rail, Osvarath's throat sacs had shifted to a pale yellow amber. I didn't know that color yet. I learned later it was something between surprise and recalculation. He was too far away for me to read the expression under it. Tier 2 was a Drac-Sorvani compression coiler. 4 meters of ridge-plated muscle, with the capacity to maintain a grip pressure that could shear structural cable, and a pheromone output calibrated to produce a prey response in every documented species the Academy had tested. It came out moving slowly, which the handler told me afterward was actually the more alarming pattern, because a fast specimen has a destination and a slow one is still deciding. It crossed the floor. It went around me twice. I turned slowly to keep it in my field of view, which is what you do on Kepler 7D when you're working a ridge seam in the dark and you hear something moving that hasn't announced itself. You don't freeze, because freezing reads as injured. You track. You breathe normally. You wait for the thing to decide. The coiler pressed its nose plate against my forearm, which I had not been briefed was something it ever did. The grid's ambient sensors found nothing in the pheromone register. Tier 2. Response threshold not reached. Escalating to Tier 3. Someone on the rail made a sound. I didn't look up. Tier 3 was the Veth-Ardak. I'd heard the name twice before, once from Osvarath as a threat category, and once from the handler who checked me in, who had said, unprompted, that the Vethran had been in the rotation for 3 intakes and had not been touched by a cadet yet. 600 kilos, apex specimen, 11 handling staff assigned to its transfer. It came out of the large gate on the north wall. The room on the observation rail went quiet, in a way that rooms don't usually go quiet. Not silent, but a specific compression of sound, like every person up there had decided at the same moment to breathe shallowly. The Vethran came across the floor. It was not fast, and it was not slow. It moved like something that had not been given a reason to hurry in a very long time. The grid's ambient sensors, I found out later, had spiked hard the moment the gate opened. Not from me, but from the 11 handling staff standing by the north wall, who had measurable fear chemical outputs just from being in the same room with it. It stopped in front of me. I looked at it. It had sensor fronds along its primary ridge plate, and they were doing the same oscillating thing the crawler had done, except slower, and with what I can only describe as more attention. It put its head down, not as an aggressive gesture. The handler nearly came off the wall before he caught himself, and pressed the top of its skull against my sternum. I put my hand on the ridge between its primary frond arrays, because that was the only thing that seemed like the right thing to do. The grid ran its full Tier 3 sequence. It filed. Stress response, not detected. Pheromone baseline, unchanged. Specimen behavior, anomalous. Classification, insufficient data. First in 31 years. I heard the handler come across the floor. I heard the grid's processing tone cycling, which means it's looking for a category and not finding one. I looked up at the observation rail. Osvaroth's throat sacs were off, no color at all, which I learned later is the Veldrani equivalent of very carefully making no statement. The handler stopped next to me. He was Keth-Solvren. Gill plates, bioluminescent. I'd learned to read them a little. His plates had gone to a deep, even white, which I associated with trying to process something unexpected. I asked him if there was a Tier 4. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said yes, technically. But it had never been used in a classification context. I asked what was in it. He looked at the Vethran, which was still leaning its primary ridge against my hand. Then he looked at me. We would have to use the Vethran for Tier 4, he said. We already did. He filed the notation that afternoon. I read it 3 weeks later when the administration processed my track assignment. The grid's result field was blank. In the notes column, the handler had written 4 words. Recommend new tier established. Os's Verath never used the chemical thing on me again. I don't know if it was a decision or if the apparatus just stopped finding anything to work with. Either way, the pressure went out of the air between us, and we had a perfectly professional relationship for the remaining 14 months of intake training. His throat sacs stayed pale most of the time around me. I never did find out what color that was.